I am really excited to anytime we can have a discussion that helps people with communicating with their loved ones who have dementia. It's a home run because my heart just breaks for the folks that are going through this process, for the individuals that have received a diagnosis or might think that they have a memory impairment, but more importantly for their loved ones. And so when we're able to provide resources and a new way of thinking about that, I really feel that it makes a difference, and the comments that I get after these discussions are always great. So today we have a thought leader in this area, Victoria Hart, and she gave me permission to call her Vicky. Vicky really charged up about today's discussion. And before we begin, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led to this unique career path.
Sure, Steve. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and to be talking to your constituents. It's so great. I have a very different background than a lot of people in my field, which is, I'm a certified recreational therapist. I started out in classical music. I was an opera singer and a voice teacher for decades.
Wow.
And then, as happens with a lot of people who go into the field of dementia, my father got frontotemporal dementia. And I started, seeing what was happening with him. And I, wanted to communicate with him throughout his illness. And so I delved into dementia and what it meant. And I was able to communicate with him actually through music, which
Hmm.
led me to volunteer and explore. And, I don't want to keep this going for too long, but get my certification. And then I started working just by chance with people with early stage dementia. And I started realizing how much is there, how much it is possible to connect with them, but one requires a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of skill. So you're not kind of hitting resistance and getting frustrated. And so I've been since then working with people with early stage dementia. It's such a blast because there's so much in there to access, but I feel like care partners sometimes just don't know how, and so I really want to facilitate that.
Man, this is great. Well, I'm real excited to dive into this topic, and I want to remind everybody that at any point during the discussion, if you have a personal anecdote, if you got a concern, if you got a question, uh, feel free to use chat, Q&A, raise your little virtual hand, and we'll address your questions. But Vicky, I think I saw that you had a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Maybe the best thing we do is let's just start sharing that, and then
Mhm.
feel free to take a break. if
Yes.
if I have a question, I'll jump in. If anybody in the audience does too, if I see anything there, and we'll get this discussion going.
That sounds great. And please feel free to interrupt me because I get passionate about this
Oh,
topic. So,
oh, I'm the same thing. In fact, yesterday in our discussion, one of the comments was, Steve, you need to talk a little less. Yeah, I
I
get
hear
all
that.
charged up too.
Yeah.
So
Good.
anyways, okay, so if you want to share your screen, we'll
Okay,
make
let
sure
me go
that's
to the,
working.
let me do that. Oh, my sharing, it says it's not turned on. So let's
Uh,
turn me back on.
there you go.
Just say when.
Oh, okay. You know why? Because we had to pause. Remember?
Right.
Yeah,
Hmm.
okay, cool. Okay, it should be you should be able to do that now.
Yes, looks good. Okay, let me open this up. Yep. And let me get rid of all the extra stuff on the screen,
And
which
then and then go
good.
to
Yeah.
start at beginning there.
Okay, that's what we want. And then we'll go slot start at the beginning. So let's go. Yes, so that's
Okay,
just me. That's the name of the
you're good.
topic. Making the most of now, speaking to the person, not the disease. So what this means is that in the early stages of the dementia, post-diagnosis, there's just so much for care partners to deal with. The relationship is changing, your loved one is changing, your whole routine is changing. It's so stressful. So it's hard to think about how can I keep connected to my loved one? How can I get as much out of this relationship as I can. And usually there's, several years after diagnosis where this is possible, but people get hung up fighting with the disease and not actually speaking to the person. So I want to show you how to distinguish that and how to get more connection with your loved one. So I'm just going to just go through some things. The first thing is just to talk about the deficits in early stage dementia and MCI, and it varies. But I think what's important to realize is that these deficits are not choices your loved one is making. There's actually parts of the brain that are shrinking, and some parts of the brain shrink quicker than other parts of the brain. So you'll see certain things, behaviors, and attitudes appearing, but try not to think that it's something your loved one is purposefully doing. And we'll get more into that. So, things that I'm sure you've all seen: short-term memory loss is affected early on, some long-term memory difficulties, but less. Long-term is more accessible. Loss of some executive function, which means initiative, sequencing, follow through. So I remember when I was doing this work at an adult day center, someone was being interviewed for membership, and her husband said, "Oh, Helen's lost interest in everything." And I thought to myself, I bet she hasn't, but she doesn't know how to access it anymore because her executive function is affected. So I encourage people to think of their loved ones like a file cabinet that the filled with information, filled with stuff, but they don't remember how to open the drawer. So we have to know how to open the drawer for them. So also judgment changes. They have some loss of judgment that's connected with executive function. Difficulty dealing with new situations. That's also because of executive function. Because when somebody says, let's go do this thing that we've never done before, if you don't have dementia, you start imagining how that's going to happen. But a person with dementia can't imagine that. So they might feel resistant. They might just say no. They might get scared. But and we take that very likely as they're just pushing back, they're just being grumpy. But really, it might be that they just feel overwhelmed because they can't think of how do we get from A to B, let alone A to Z. And then there's difficulty with reading and spatial awareness, and difficulty once again with initiating. So they might like to do something, but I'll be sitting somewhere and I'll think of a song will pop into my head, or think, oh, I need to call that person. Those kinds of thoughts are less likely. So it's important, I think, for care partners to know that and start to really reorient your mind to understanding that that is the disease. So we can figure out how to talk to the person instead. How am I doing, Steve? Any questions so far? Oh, I don't.
Sorry,
Okay,
sorry about that.
that's all right.
I think you're good.
All right.
Keep on going.
All right. Now, the other thing I want to talk about are the strengths that a person with dementia has, and to start thinking in those terms, because that's going to guide you. So their personal strengths, their interests, their life interests are still accessible. And we'll get into the how a little later. Opinions and feelings are still strong and authentic. So we want to delve into that world. They are still usually able to enjoy social, intellectual, and emotional engagement, and they need a little help. They need a little guidance. So again, that's going to get into the how we do this. Curiosity is still strong. And that's something I found in my meetings with people that I do online and in my work. I find the people I work with have a sense of wonder about the world that is just astonishing and inspiring. So I'm always trying to provide new ideas or an old idea in a new way. So, and the responses I get are just like, this kind of opening up of people. So curiosity and wonder are amazing things. And it doesn't have to be big, but like when the James Webb Space Telescope went a million miles away from the Earth, we covered that a lot because it was wondrous, it was miraculous, and they loved it. That they may not have remembered it didn't matter, but in the moment, they felt the wonder. And again, ability to enjoy new ideas and experiences if properly presented. So those are the strengths. And then finally, for this thing, I want to talk about some of the obstacles to connection, because I'm sure most people have felt that, it's just so difficult to connect. Sometimes, especially when the care partners feel overwhelmed. Just before I do, two little things that are actually really important. There have been more and more studies published that link hearing loss with dementia in older adults. So it is so important to get those hearing aids, get that hearing test, and there can be a lot of resistance to it. And I just encourage you, because if the information isn't coming in to the brain is going to atrophy more. So we want to keep that, and
Well,
also vision as well.
I'm
Steve, should I
I'm
stop for a sec?
Well, yeah, no, you can keep
Yeah.
the slide up, but
Okay.
I just wanted to jump in on that
Yes.
and share with the audience that I recently had a cognitive exam from this organization, Sunday Health. I'm dropping in some recordings where I talk about that. And when I went through the screening before I took the cognitive exam, two key questions were, when was the last time did you have your vision tested? And your hearing tested? Well, my vision hadn't been tested in a while, and I was struggling with my vision and tilting my glasses and doing stuff like that. And when you can't see as well as you should, you aren't thinking right. I know
Right.
that. And we all know with our loved ones that can't hear, it impacts our thinking. So I'm dropping that in there. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because
Yeah.
it really is one of those key things we've got
Mhm.
to beat the drum on.
Yeah, and it's foundational. I mean, I don't have the figures exactly to mind, but it's something like a 20% increase in dementia when a person doesn't have their hearing corrected. So you're going to need to find a way through that resistance, because there's a lot of it. Being a musician, it's like, I want to hear my world. I don't quite understand that, but there it is. So thank you, Steve. That's very important. And the research is incontrovertible. So then let's talk about emotional obstacles to connection for the care partner, for you, those of you who love someone with dementia. You're dealing with so much. And so I want to really acknowledge that and highlight that, because that's, the journey is what it is, and we're going to try to make it better. But the truth is, since there's a sense of grief and loss, of who the person was, and the life that you expected, the life you had. There's fear about the future. Frustration is really common because you're trying to communicate and you're coming across forgetfulness, repetition, resistance, all these things, and so frustrating. So I'm hoping that some of the things we talk about will help lower the frustration level. Feeling overwhelmed. Your role in your family might have drastically changed. It's very overwhelming. Loneliness, your partner or your parent, it's very difficult. They'd seem not as available. Change in relationship status, and of course, anxiety about the future. So those are all real. They are a lot. And again, communication makes all of that worse. Communication problems, I should say, and can make all of it a lot better. At least you can give yourself moments when you feel that connection, when you don't feel the weight of the disease quite as much. And then I want to talk about the emotional obstacles to connecting for the person with dementia, because actually they have emotional obstacles to connecting. So at this stage, most people are aware of cognitive changes and may feel or fear loss of control, dignity, and sense of self. Now, some people don't feel that. They have a thing that's called, oh gosh, I wrote it down because I can't remember how to say it, anosognosia, which is people who, because of their cognitive state, don't perceive their physical difficulty. And it can be as intense as someone who is blind thinks they're not, or someone who's not blind believes they are. So it can be very extreme, but it happens in dementia as well. So why does a person with dementia say no? Why do they resist? Why do they create frustration? Well, they might have a resistance to needing help or appearing infirm. I think especially for men, but also women too. They felt competent in their lives and accomplished, and now they're starting to feel that diminishing. So that might cause them distress. Uh, Diminishing personal dignity if they need help with things that they didn't need to before, activities of daily living, for example. Feeling overwhelmed by suggestions of activities because of loss of executive function. And I'm going to keep repeating this because it's so important. We're going to find a way to circumvent executive function as much as possible. Beating on those parts of the brain that are no longer there makes no sense. If someone were colorblind, we wouldn't get frustrated with them because they couldn't see the difference between red and green. It's just not there. So we need to come up to that sort of understanding with people with dementia and start to focus on where we can connect. They can be embarrassed by the changes they perceive in themselves because feelings are still there. Feelings are very much there, and that's going to be our key into a lot of this connection. And oh, I wrote it down, anosognosia, where they don't understand their condition. I hear fine. It's like, but I'm screaming at you all the time. So those are some of the emotional obstacles. And so I want to pause here, Steve. Do we have any questions or comments?
Yeah, so there's a someone had a uh, tell us a little bit about when when somebody doesn't have a diagnosis, but they are you're concerned that they might have some memory impairment.
Mm.
Is what are some next steps for us to do there?
Mm. Well, I do think that getting a diagnosis, if you are noticing, memory impairment, in some way, like repetition that's unusual or forgetting things in a way that seems outside of the realm of normal aging, then I really think getting a diagnosis is essential because you have to know what you're dealing with. And that will also help unlock resources for you. But you really have to have that as it's a famous saying that, if you forget your car keys, that's just aging. But if you put your car keys in the freezer and don't know what they're for, then that's dementia.
Okay.
So, I really recommend it.
Okay, and then I'm going to scheduling a neurology. Well, sometimes you got to go through your general
Right.
practitioner, get a referral to a neurologist. You
Hmm.
get check out that link that I dropped in for
Hmm.
Sunday Health. That's an option. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay,
And a lot of places in big cities, there is usually an option of diagnostic centers associated with big hospitals. There are a lot of people who are dealing with memory loss, so those resources, at least in the established cities, are out there. I don't know very much. I'm a city girl, so I don't know what's happening in more rural areas of the country. So,
got it.
but yeah, that's important. So, how do we do this? We speak to the person, not the disease. So we're going to focus on fun, focus on laughter, focus on friendship. People at this stage are usually aware of the changes in their cognition and may isolate, participate less in social situations, become bored and or apathetic, may exhibit resistance to engaging in activities. This can be because of not wanting to engage in something that heightens their sense of being not normal, or because their new level of executive functioning makes them hesitant to try something new. They may resist participation because they are afraid they are going to fail or be tested in some way. After all, they were actually tested a lot to get their diagnosis. I remember I was talking to a woman, and we had attended a program together, and she was talking about her mother with dementia. And she mentioned to me that every time she visited her mother, she said, "Do you know who I am?" And I shared with her, I said, I think that's maybe not the best way to engage with your mom. I said, remember when you were in school and you didn't study for a test and you sat down? How did you feel? And she went, oh, it's like, yeah, you knew you were going to fail that test. Don't make your mother feel she's going to fail that test. And I shared with her that when my father was in skilled nursing because of his progression, whenever I saw him, I would hug him, I would kiss him, and I'd say, "Hi, Dad, this is your daughter, Vicky." And I don't care if he didn't remember a second before that he had a daughter, Vicky, or didn't even remember then. At that moment, he had a daughter, Vicky, who was hugging him and kissing him. So don't test your loved one. And they just feel terrible because they know they're failing. So we're going to be focusing in on the feelings. The part of the brain that feels the amygdala and other parts of the brain are affected later in the process. In fact, I could say they remain till almost the very end. In my work with people with dementia, I have worked with people more advanced, and feelings are the way to connect. By that point, that's pretty much all that's left. So that's where you
Um,
wanted to get into. Yes, Steve.
Yeah, we had a program on a few weeks ago, and I
Hmm.
will drop that into chat where I liked how you talked about taking a test,
Hmm.
and what our speaker said was that that people with dementia, you are familiar. They don't know sort of the standard societal answers. So it's like, what's my name? Like that's a question that they can't answer, but they know that you're familiar and they know that they love you, but they don't know your name, and they aren't able to articulate your name, and you're the daughter. And then the daughter gets all upset and they get upset, and
Hmm.
she said, one thing you shouldn't be doing is arguing with somebody with dementia.
True.
But okay, let's see. Dixie says, recommend using Dementia Directives Compassion and Choices Toolkit early in diagnosis to assure the person with dementia will have an end of life they want. Oh, that's a
Mm.
really good comment
Hmm.
there,
Hmm.
Dixie, is that absolutely, if you've delayed doing any kind of advanced planning,
Yeah,
once a loved one has initial diagnosis, man, you got to get that together.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great comment. Great comment. Yeah. And some of the thing I think I saw that talk that Steve was referring to was excellent, and I think they were talking about people a little bit more advanced in their disease process, but it still counts for here. We don't want to be arguing with a part of the brain that's not there. Um, Now, so what do you do? Try to speak with your loved one with respect at all times. Remember, they didn't choose the disease. And I made a little list of things to remember about your loved one, to respect the life that they lived and are still living, the strengths they have, the passions they still possess. I will share with you that my people care about things very, very deeply. And if I unlock that door a little bit, all sorts of things come out, including insights, humor, wordplay from people who have, difficulty speaking. Usually, what comes out is amazing. Um, they have the interests you help reawaken. They have the perspective that they have to share, their sense of humor, their compassion, and their wisdom. Those things are in the file box, and we're going to get them out. So, number one for us as care partners, misinterpreting symptoms as belonging to the person rather than the disease. It's going to make you insane. Now, what's tricky is sometimes people are difficult people, and so there can be an overlap. So I just want to acknowledge that. But to look at lack of initiative, lack of interest, apathy, no follow through, inertia, often people with dementia show that, and then their care partner will say they're depressed, and then they get tested and there's no depression. It's once again executive function. They don't know how to do those things, but it doesn't mean they won't respond. Um, I remember a friend of mine whose father had was in the process of dementia, who used to paint. The father used to paint, and she said, I keep asking my father if he wants to paint, and he says no. And I said to her, Jill, he probably can't imagine how to do it. You have to set up the easel, you have to get your colors, you have to get your brushes, and then you have to think of what you're going to paint. That is probably not available to him anymore. I said, but I bet if you brought paper and pastels together, you could do some beautiful stuff. So what you want to do is bypass the resistance and get to the core. So making colors, but don't ask them, let's do this complex activity, because they might just say it, nothing comes to them. So they say no. They may lose interest in reading and reading related activities. So audiobooks, podcasts, those are very good things to reach for. Resistance to trying new things. That's definitely a symptom. And resistance to engaging in old hobbies. I have a friend who knows someone who has dementia, and she was in rehab. She wanted to give her something to do, and the friend had crocheted for a long time, and so she bought her a crocheting kit, and she handed it to her, and the woman looked at it and then just put it away. And and I shared to my friend, if you had started the crocheting for her and handed it to her, she probably could have done that. And that's a really important issue I want to raise here. Explicit versus implicit memory. And that's something Steve was talking about just now. Explicit in terms of the facts and figures and things we remember and we call up to mind when we want to. Those things really start to fade right away in the dementia process. But intrinsic memory is, we sometimes call it muscle memory, or like riding a bicycle. It's when you've done things repetitively and they're just automatically there. So, in this example, this woman looked at this kit of crocheting items and didn't know what to do with it. But I think if you had put a started crochet thing in her hand, I'm sure she would have known how to do it, because that's intrinsic memory and that remains for a long time. So, um, that gets me into the brain. What's going on there? We don't have to get into all this because I've kind of talked about it. So we're going for what we call procedural memory and feelings. So, and this is the implicit memory. And what's interesting is that people with dementia can still learn, especially in the early stage. They can lay down new implicit or procedural memory. So, one thing that drives people crazy is repetition. You know, when are we going to the blood? When are we going to the doc? When are we going to the doctor? When are we going, and it can drive you nuts. I mean, seriously. So what I suggest to people is to have like a whiteboard in a place where your loved one will always see it, say the refrigerator. And every day you write down what's going to happen and the time. And then when your loved one says, when are we going to the whatever, you say, look at the board, look at the board, look at the board. And they will begin to associate having a feeling of needing an answer and going to the board, because that's procedural. If you tell them we're going to the doctor at 3 o'clock, that's a different kind of memory. That's explicit memory. And that there really aren't enough brain cells to hold that thought. But I can go check the board, that you can develop over time. So, it's easier to say, check the board 15 times than have to explain when you're going to the doctor. So that's a really important thing. Let's see. So what else do we do? Feelings, not facts. Get emotional. I love these quotes. The first one from Dorothy Parker: "The cure for boredom is curiosity. There is no cure for curiosity, and curiosity feels good." So we're going to work on that. And I'll just give you a brief story. When I was an opera singer, I did study a little bit of foreign languages, a little bit of Italian. I was pretty good with German, but I sang in English, German, Italian, French, Spanish, Czech, and Russian. And I didn't speak Czech or Russian, and not very much Spanish. How did I do that? How did I memorize hours of music? in these languages. And I realized it's because all the music was connected to feelings. And if you think about it, your strongest memories in life are connected to strong feelings. So this is one of the main keys of connecting to your loved one. Steve, any more
Yeah,
comments?
now, well, and I just dropped this into chat. It's a question from Jackie, and it's not necessarily on your
Mhm.
in alignment with what we've been talking about, but I'm hoping that you or other folks in the audience today might have some guidance for Jackie. And she asks, are there any other solutions or advice you might have for participants that have become verbal and physically abusive towards other older adults and the staff in an adult daycare setting?
That's very tough. Um, when I've worked in adult daycare, not in an adult residency setting, uh, and I'm not a medical doctor, but when somebody was belligerent in that, not just disagreeable, but really belligerent to the point where they were knocking things over and maybe even getting physical with people, that usually initiated a psychiatric evaluation
Yeah.
and often medication. Because if that was not how the person was, then it indicates there is a change in the brain.
Hmm.
And as you as I gather from your question, there's an understanding that you're not going to be able to say, well, that's not what we do here, you know.
Yeah. Well, and see, and that's actually, it's funny. I've been on so many of these discussions now. It's like I can, and we've had questions similar to this, and I forgot who was saying it, but obviously, if there's a medical change, got to get into the doctor and this, that, and the other. But one of the things that is occurring to me
Hmm.
in an adult daycare setting, you've got a bunch of people, the staff has been trained. The staff knows not to argue with the the members of the community
Hmm.
because it's pointless. However, the other participants have not been through that training,
Hmm.
and if
Hmm.
any of us have sort of eavesdropped in on the conversations at an adult daycare or a memory care community,
Hmm.
what you hear sometimes is another participant saying, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Like correcting the person there. And I bet a lot of the experts that I've had on here said that the aggressive behavior oftentimes is, because somebody is telling them that they can't do something or
Mhm.
arguing, and it just creates frustration. So I don't know if that's helpful, Jackie, but maybe there's some other folks that have tips as
Mm.
well.
Well, I think that's absolutely true, Steve. I've seen that as well. I've seen how in a group, one person can take a group from being very kind of copacetic to kind of aggressive. And then it's kind of on the people who are the caregivers in the facility to notice and note and make sure certain people don't sit together, or to intervene before things escalate. So the other thing that occurs to me, if they would allow you to kind of observe uh,
Mhm.
your loved one, and you might be better at noticing when somebody's, triggering them. So that's another thing I might suggest.
Oh, here's a response. Michaela says, I've had similar experiences. I know the gentleman very well. I react with humor, saying something like, oh my, I'm so afraid of you. You won't hurt me. It, uh, he is expressing his frustration and being told what to do, his
Hmm.
frustration. I acknowledge it with both humor and distraction. And I hope this is helpful. That's great, Michaela. Yeah.
Hmm.
Anyways, it's why I love these discussions. When we bring up dementia, there's just so many different paths that we can go down
Yeah.
and take.
Oh, yes. I think that, Michaela, I think that was a great comment. And humor and distraction are fantastic tools. And I have
And
seen,
also, like, the other thing, I hate to interrupt here,
no,
but
it's fine.
you kick this off with music, is that we've all seen that amazing video where people are just transformed when the headphones
Mhm.
are on.
Alive
And
inside.
that can also be something to maybe identify with the family members,
Mhm.
what is their favorite music, and things like that.
Yes.
Um,
But I've also seen at the place I work once with the people who were a little more advanced in their disease, one of the caregivers kind of got in an argument with one of the uh, clients, and he was starting to flip out, and I was able to intervene and calm him down. And for him, it was really just feeling like he was being heard. He just needed to feel that he was being heard, and he calmed down. But I think, um, like you said, distraction and humor are wonderful. But again, another person with dementia won't have that accessible to them.
mhm.
Probably not. So it's hard. And also people lose their inhibitions. So somebody might say something that before they had dementia, they would have kept to themselves, but they don't feel that. They don't have those restrictions anymore.
And Jackie says, thank you, everybody. I was feeling so awful because I know it's just the person's brain going through changes and have given professional advice to have caregiver get a medical evaluation. So, yeah, Jackie, this is just so tough. Thanks for being brave enough to share that with us,
Absolutely.
and hopefully some of the things we're talking about today can be helpful.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. All right, let's see. Oh, so now we're getting more into the what to do. Routine is really, really important, and probably a lot of you already know this, but just, change can be startling and upsetting, even to the extent that there was one client in our group who liked to have a certain set of pencils by her desk when she would have her online session with us, and they weren't there. And her daughter told me she got very angry, very upset. And that's not who she was as a person, but it shows that it's really there's just not the ability to manage those things. So one of the things that I think is really helpful is if you can create a scheduled time or times during the day where you really focus on the person and have intentional connection. I sometimes call it a conversation station, but it can be if you walk together, it could be during the walk. Or, for example, if someone cooks dinner every night and maybe the loved one watches TV, maybe a thing to do is bring them in the kitchen with you and listen to a podcast together on something that interests you. And then from time to time, pause the podcast and ask the person what they think. Do you agree with that? That's a great way to engage a person in conversation. Do you agree? Because then they don't have to come up with the initial idea. And then they say, no, I think that's wrong. And you go, why? And then you'll get the person started in a discussion and you'll have connection. And then sometimes in that process, memories come up and interesting comments come up. So have that, and then you're not don't have to feel as a care partner that you're on the hook to do this all day, every day, because that's not a reasonable thing. Because you're all incredibly busy and have your own stuff to deal with. So if you could have that, you know, 45 minutes when you're preparing dinner, or even if you're watching a show together on TV, pause it every once in a while and ask the person if they thought that was funny or did they like that. Or, if they're at a beach, you could even say, remember when we used to take our kid to the beach? Because an old memory they're likely to be able to retrieve. So, you know, break up those things with a moment of engagement, and your loved one will feel much more normalized. They'll feel much more restored to themselves. It, I've just heard from care partners after we do our 90-minute meetings. They say their loved one has changed for the rest of the day. They feel satisfied. They feel they've been heard. They've connected. They've had something to say. They've had an opinion. So if you can just find really specific slots where you can mindfully do that, I think it can be extremely helpful. And again, prepare your loved one for changes in schedule by mentioning it and create that check-in system that I talked about, the whiteboard. Steve, any comments about this?
Not exactly specific, but Andrea
Hmm.
says, is it okay to get inside of their world? For instance, if they say, "Do you see that red frog?" responding and saying, "Yes, I see the red frog."
Mm. What I would say, and this I take from my work in the theater, because I was trained as an actress before I went to be a singer, the rules of improv. You don't have to say yes, but don't say no. What I
Mhm.
would suggest is if, because there are some things like Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's where there might be kind of a hallucination aspect, ask them to tell you about it.
Mm.
So you don't have to say if it's there. And I say, tell me about it. Is it pretty? What's it doing? Why do you think it's there? And they're like, oh, okay. And when you've had your discussion, you can just move on.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of improv. Yes, but I like how you said you don't need to say yes. It's just not saying no. I really like that. It's very
Yeah.
easy to do that. But the interesting thing is we're in a world of no buts.
Yeah.
We've gone through our whole
Yeah.
life. No, I'm not going to do that, this, that, and the other. And it's really hard when your loved one sees a red frog
Hmm.
getting into their world, but
Hmm.
I
Well,
love
what
that response.
what I would suggest is instead of seeing it as a hallucination, that's what it is. Maybe you can think of it, my loved one is starting to tell a story.
Hmm. Yeah.
And let me ask them about the story they're telling. So you can take some of that weight off of you, of getting the, oh my God, here's the disease, here's this dementia or her dementia, here's this craziness. No, just say, my loved one is telling a story.
Yeah.
I'm going to listen
and
to that story.
and you know what, I mean, I know I'm kind of going feeding off some of the things that you previously said, but you were
Sure.
talking about, hey, you're sitting there watching a television show with your loved one and you pause to talk about it. Well, think about it. The books that we read, the television shows we watch, they're
Hmm.
full of stories about red frogs, and that's perfectly acceptable,
Right.
but when we see one in reality, all of a sudden it's not acceptable. And because Netflix and novels that we read, that is storytelling,
That's
and
right.
that's acceptable. So we need to make that acceptable for our loved ones, and we might hear a really interesting and compelling story.
Hmm. Yes, and I think in addition to the loved one, it's to make it easier on ourselves. As care partners, you all have yourselves face to face with all the incredible challenges of the disease. So where you can give yourself a little space to just ride the wave. You're not hurting anybody. In fact, your loved one might feel really heard, and you might find that there's less resistance or less anxiety because you're not challenging them, you're inviting them to share their experience with you. And as long as they're not in danger, it's going to make things easier for you and them. So I think that's great. And you're absolutely right, Steve. There's lots of fiction out there. So, use that definitely. All right, so a couple of do's and don'ts. Avoid pressuring your loved one in areas of deficit. Doing so can increase anxiety and feelings of disability. Focus on feelings and opinions, not facts. This is good for you. You should wear it. It's cold out. Put on your sweater. Um, they might get some resistance. You could try, instead of telling them what they should do, I love you in this sweater. I always want to cuddle you when you're in this sweater. Would you try it on for me? I love how you look in it. You have a better chance. Don't quiz a person with dementia about facts, but do ask about feelings and opinions. Don't you remember, you know, we went to that restaurant? Or how about, um, I love French food. Do you love French food? They may or may not remember. Then you can always talk about it, and they might remember a dish, but don't quiz them. Bring them into a conversation. And the last one is similar. You saw that video yesterday, don't you remember? You want to reframe those things. You don't want to say, "Don't you remember?" No, they don't, and now they feel bad. you know? You can always say, if you can do I statements, it's better. I saw this movie yesterday or last week that I loved. Did you see it? They could say, maybe they say yes, maybe say no. It's like, oh, well, it was really fun. Maybe we'll see it one day. You know, make I statements if you need to ask them something instead of accusing them. That's a little nuanced, but I do really feel that every place you can be acknowledging of where they are as opposed to accusing them of where they are, it'll be helpful. Yes,
I,
Steve.
I love it. Okay. Wendy has a great question.
Mhm.
What if the hallucination or delusion is disturbing or scary to your loved one?
Mhm.
What are some things that we can say or do?
Um, I think there are a number of things. I think that's a great question. I think you do the same thing. If they're scared, you ask them, what do they see happening? They're scared. Why are they scared? And then you try to continue along that thought and kind of deliver them to a safe place mentally and even physically. So it depends. If there's like a dragon, it's like, oh, that does sound really frightening. And it's got fire coming out of his nose. Well, why don't we that sounds very frightening. Let's move away from there and hopefully the dragon won't follow us. If it's
Mhm.
something disturbing like a child is drowning, you could say, I've heard like Teepa Snow, she deals with this beautifully. She's a wonderful specialist in this. You want to go along with it and say, oh, that's so scary. Maybe we should go for help. And then you can again leave the area and then try to redirect. Or you could say, after you redirect, you could say, oh, I just saw the child's mother helped her. She's fine,
Mhm.
and then keep going. But that is tough. That is tough. But you want to acknowledge and redirect if you can.
Right.
If you say she's not there, there's not happening, that's not going to help.
Yep. No, that's great.
Yeah. All righty. And um, so again, what to do? Make choices simple. So do you want to go out? Is pretty open-ended. And what does that even mean? Too many possibilities. Rather, let's go to the store or let's go for a walk. Be very specific. Um, for the person with dementia, it's hard to imagine the how of of a new activity. So simply saying no feels easier. So that's where you get a lot of resistance. Saying no is a way of exercising control over a situation. So what can you do? One of the things that affects people in early stage dementia is a loss of a sense of purpose. They can't drive anymore. They can't go to work anymore. They're watched a lot. So try presenting an idea as something you would like to do and ask them to join you. You can remind them of something they enjoy about the activity without saying, don't you remember that? Or you used to love. Stay in the present. I think you'll enjoy it is a better response, or this will be easy. If there's a concern about the difficulty of a situation, you can explain to them, like, let's go to the store. Their concern is like, oh, it's only a 5-minute drive, and it's very beautiful. And then finally, there's propose activities as being helpful to you. For example, you would really enjoy their company on this drive or walk. It takes the burden off of them and helps them feel useful. I miss you. I would love to have you with me. Everybody loves to hear that. Everybody wants to be wanted. Yep.
I, I love it.
And
Um,
more comments? Should I pause?
no, no, no. Keep on going here.
Okay.
Oh,
All right.
wow. And I'm looking, boy, we burned through almost an hour already. This is
Yeah.
great.
Well, let me give you this last bit. I think this is really important. Social situations, feeling self-conscious in social situations because of concerns that some people will judge them. So that's really important. And the person with dementia, as Steve mentioned earlier, not quite remembering names, et cetera, et cetera. So keep your partner in the know. Subtly reintroduce everyone by name. Don't wait for your loved one to fumfer. Like I said, I kissed my dad and said, "Hi, I'm your daughter Vicky," every time I saw him for 3 years. What's it to me? Um, subtly reintroduce everyone by name, and you can do it just by saying hello to them. Hey, here's Joe. And you turn to your hubby, Paul, and you say, Paul, doesn't Joe look well? Hey, Joe, Paul and I were just talking to you. Or, Sarah, how did you enjoy your trip to the Bahamas? You drop those information bombs right with your person who you love so they don't have to guess. Give them the information. If your loved one seems distracted in a conversation, repeat what was said. Don't be shy, or the topic of the discussion, and then ask them what they think about it, or if it was funny, or, be their advocate in social situations. And if a friend has some interesting news to share and your loved one doesn't seem to get it, ask them to tell your loved one directly. Have them repeat it to them directly. Oh, Paul would love to hear that. He didn't quite get that. Would you repeat that? I'd love for Paul to hear that and share that with you. Don't be afraid to ask someone to repeat something for your loved one. And if they start talking over that person's head, you direct them. No, Paul would like to hear it directly from you. Don't be afraid to do that. Sometimes people, as you all know, people get very anxious about being around people who are not 100% well in their eyes, be it
Hmm.
with a disease or dementia. And really, you can help that situation because your loved one feels it. So have including them, doing these easy steps to include them in social situations can make an enormous difference.
Oh yeah, yeah, and you really see if you've folks, we've spotlighted a few of the empathy programs out there, like the virtual dementia tour and
Mhm.
the virtual VR dementia tools, where you can sort of get in the mind, or it helps you have more empathy to how we are acting or treating or talking behind somebody's back, what have you. Okay. Another question here. Can you speak about how one might deal with Parkinson's patient?
Mhm.
Lack of judgment,
Mhm.
impulsivity, hypersexuality, who's been involved in an inappropriate extramarital relationship. Neurologists say it's not common, but they cannot tease out whether it's due to the disease, medications, or just poor character. Whoa, this
Mm.
is a tough one. I'm sorry that you've got to be dealing with that.
Mm.
Any comments on that
You,
question?
I first have a lot of empathy for you, and that's very loaded. Um, was your husband unfaithful in the past? Is this who he was, or is this all new?
Yeah, I mean that I guess that's a well, yeah, we'll see. And I'm not sure if it's a husband,
Mhm.
it's but in any event, I think
Yeah.
that's the question that I would be, oh, not in the past. Okay, so this is a
Mm.
different behavior now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the neurologist, I this is really, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have experience with that specific situation, and the people I've dealt with dementia, I mean, with Parkinson's, have not shown those symptoms. But I think if I were in that position, I would I'd go to a psychiatric gerontologist, or someone that could be recommended, because if there's extreme personality change, that might be something that medication could help.
Hmm. And again, I've had so many discussions on the topic of dementia. One of our panel members talked about thinking about dementia. It's like living life without filters,
Hmm.
and it's you can see where like inappropriate behavior, it no like we're not living by society's rules anymore, and they're not, nobody's doing this intentionally.
Hmm.
It's just more impulsivity and what have you, and it's just create, hopefully medications, but
Yeah,
also creativity to kind of turn uh the behavior into something different with through
yeah.
distractive measures and what have you.
Yes, but
um
it is hard because, we think of more impulsivity, but perhaps, and that might be part of it, but the parts of the brain that, keep us in line, that help us have control, those have probably disappeared.
Hmm.
So that's why I think of medication, because it sounds like this is fairly extreme behavior, the hypersexuality. And so again, I think of significant brain changes, and is there enough of those parts of the brain's functioning to allow him to change his behavior? And I think that is the question to find out.
Yeah. Man, this is
That's rough
really
stuff.
tough. And
Yeah.
again, to the person that asked that question and all
Mhm.
the challenging uh things that our audience members are going through today, as we're speaking, it's big hug to you all.
Yes.
Okay. Wow, we burned through an hour.
Yes, we
Now,
did.
Vicky, one of the things that I wanted to make sure
Mhm.
to do is you have been so generous with your time and spending it with us. I want to dive into how you help people
Oh,
and
thank you. Great.
I've got your website up
Hmm.
here, which I'll make sure to drop into chat. But tell us a little bit about what you offer to folks with your organization, A Gathering of Minds.
Oh, thank you. Well, I developed this. It's an online small group program for people in the early stages of memory loss from any kind of dementia or, Parkinson's, whatever. And we meet twice a week for 90-minute meetings over Zoom. And my focus are on cognitive reserve, building and maintaining cognitive reserve, social engagement, and restoring people to themselves so that they feel like who they are. So every meeting is different, because the three aspects that build cognitive reserve are novelty, analytical thought, and is best done in a social situation. So people can get into Zoom from anywhere, and we talk about everything. We have a structure, but every day is new. We do some cognitive puzzles and this and that, but we talk about topics. We talk about the space program. We talk about history, biography, this climate change, and we also talk about the arts. We'll show dance. We'll have choirs. We'll do all this. So it's a very rich environment for 90 minutes, and the care partners don't participate at all. They just start the Zoom and they go do whatever they want to do for 90 minutes. And people really love it. It really enriches their lives. So I'm really, really excited
And
about it.
this is for early stage memory loss,
Hmm.
correct? Okay,
Yes.
great,
So,
great.
yeah, and it's also great for people who have mobility issues. So they can have a regular social engagement and intellectual engagement from the comfort of their home.
Excellent. Okay, yes,
Mhm.
somebody was saying, please put that information back up again. Okay, so we've got, make sure that, and I'm going to have an easy link to this on the recording link. And then we'll also have, contact for you to get in touch with Vicky directly.
Right.
I saw on your
Right
website
up here.
there, you're more than happy to do
Oh,
an initial
you froze, I
consultation with
think.
folks. Oh, I'm frozen. Can you hear me?
Oh,
Uh-oh. I can hear you, Vic.
hello.
Yep, I can hear you. Um, oh, now you're frozen. Well, folks, the good news is that we burned through an hour here,
Full to be.
and
Hi, can you hear me now? Oh, now I can't hear you. I can't hear you, Steve. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so
okay,
much. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone.
you bet. All righty.
Bye-bye.